the last stop. The rhythmic hum of the bus was a constant companion to Charles, the driver of the last bus. His shift started at the stroke of midnight and ended as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. He'd grown accustomed to the solitude, the quiet hours filled with the soft rumble of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights passing by. He never thought his night would be anything other than that, until one night he would never forget. It was an autumn night, crisp and cold, the leaves rustling under a dark sky as rain pounded on the windows. The clock read 2 a.m., and Charles found himself at the last stop before turning around a desolate part of town, nestled beside an old, forgotten cemetery. The dim streetlights barely pierced the darkness, most of them burned out, casting long, eerie shadows. As was usual at this time, no passengers were waiting. He was just about to start his route back when a lone figure emerged from the shadows, a man wearing a dark jacket, his face obscured by the night. The man boarded the bus without a word, settling into one of the back seats. Charles continued the route, the bus lurching through empty streets, as the man began to hum a haunting song. It was a strange, ominous tune, one that Charles didn't recognize, and the man's voice was chilling, sending shivers down his spine. This was just the start of a night filled with terror. The man continued his unsettling behavior, mumbling incoherent words and laughing disturbingly. Charles's discomfort grew into unease, a primal fear settling deep in his stomach. He realized that he might be dealing with someone truly dangerous. The man suddenly stood, pressing the button to signal his stop. It was a deserted stretch of road, and when Charles opened the doors, the man remained still, smiling. Charles asked him to get off, but he didn't respond. The man began to walk slowly towards the front of the bus, his smile widening to reveal crooked, yellow teeth. Charles was trapped in his seat, watching with growing horror as the man advanced. "Do you know who I am, driver?" The man whispered, his voice an icy breath that made Charles shiver. Charles shook his head, unable to speak, consumed by dread. The man continued, "Don't you remember? I was one of your passengers many years ago. One night just like this, but you wouldn't let me off. You had fun watching me miss the last bus, didn't you?" Charles had no memory of the event, but he was too terrified to think clearly. The man's face was now inches from his, and Charles could feel his cold, stinking breath. "This is your last stop, driver. Today, it's your turn to stay behind." Before Charles could react, the man shoved him back with incredible force. He fell to the floor stunned. The man lunged at him, his cold, skeletal hand closing around Charles's throat, stifling his screams. Charles struggled desperately, his life slipping away. In a last act of survival, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a flashlight, wielding it with all his strength and striking the man's head. The impact knocked the man back, releasing Charles's throat. Coughing and gasping for air, Charles scrambled to the driver's seat, slamming the safety door shut. He called 911, explaining the situation. As he waited, the man on the ground began to stir, looking up. His smile was bigger and more disturbing than ever. He didn't seem to be in any pain and showed no normal emotion. When the police arrived, they arrested the man. He whispered incomprehensible words and laughed as they handcuffed him. Though the police assured him they would investigate, the experience had left a deep scar. The man's sinister smile and icy whisper haunted him, making his nights on the bus lonelier and more terrifying than ever. He learned that evil could lurk in unexpected places. The story of Charles became an urban legend, with his night bus gaining an infamous reputation as the last bus. Every shadow, every haunting laugh would remind him of that night, a sinister smile in the darkness forever etched in his mind. The Burger King nightmare. Aidan, a young man who had only worked at the fast food chain Popeye's Chicken, had never experienced anything truly remarkable or frightening. His job was usually mundane: drunken customers, family fights, and the usual chaos of a late-night fast food rush. However, he was about to face the worst night of his life. One particular night, the atmosphere was chaotic with the intense murmur of conversation, but a lone figure stood out. A very tall, thin man who sat alone in a corner, his small eyes wide open and terrifying. His gaze was fixed and penetrating, watching every move, sending chills down Aidan's spine. As the night progressed, more customers arrived, but the man remained static, making no requests, simply observing everyone. It was as if he was analyzing people, studying their every move. He walked toward a family, giving them a forced smile, an emotion that did not come naturally to him. The family became uncomfortable, as if something was wrong. His smile widened, but his eyes never seemed to blink. Families became increasingly terrified as he approached their tables. Some grabbed their food and left. The man's gestures were disproportionate, his laughter enormous. Aidan watched him from behind the counter. Some children were crying, and parents were looking at Aidan for help. The man didn't seem to leave, as if enjoying the discomfort. Aidan decided to approach, trying to remain calm. "Excuse me, sir, do you need anything?" he asked. The man slowly turned, his gaze fixing on Aidan. "Oh no, I don't need anything at all. I'm just enjoying the company. Isn't that the charm of a fast food restaurant?" The words were not threatening, but his tone and look were sinister. After a defiant smile, the man simply walked out of the restaurant. Though people talked about the man, they soon dismissed the experience as an anecdote. The clock struck 11 p.m., and Aidan went outside for a break. He was still nervous, but felt that he had handled it well. As he walked to his car, he saw the man in the shadows, watching his vehicle. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Aidan asked. The man turned slowly, his smile widening eerily, reflecting an unsettling calm. He walked toward Aidan, who instinctively backed away, trying to get back inside. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm just here to talk." "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well," Aidan said. "I told you I need to talk." Suddenly, the man's expression changed, his head began to shake, and his eyes got even bigger, as if they were going out of place. "Don't you understand? Can't you see? I've been nice all night. Why can't I have a normal conversation with anyone? Have you all gone crazy? I want to talk. I want to talk." The man grabbed Aidan with both hands and threw him away. Aidan tried to crawl back to the restaurant but stumbled. The man laughed, mocking him. "Come on, can't you even run? Hey, come on, you can do it, just a little run. If you can't even run, some bad guy will hurt you." With the strength he could muster, Aidan ran back inside and told his manager. The manager pressed the panic button. When the police arrived, the man was gone. Aidan never saw the man again, but his presence continued to haunt him. Every shadow, every dark corner of the store reminded him of that night. As he left, he saw the silhouette waving at him from the shadows. Aidan never went back to Popeye's again. He always felt that the man was near him, stalking, ready to kill him. The evil was always lurking around. The asylum's secrets. Jacob Benedict, a paranormal investigator, had spent 3 years exploring supposed hauntings, coming to the conclusion that there were no such things as ghosts, creatures, or things that go bump in the night. He had heard of the abandoned asylum in Williamsburg, Virginia, a place shrouded in myths and dark stories. There were stories of students who snuck in and were found days later, silent and void of themselves. A government investigation had followed, but the findings were so grave that the case was buried, and the asylum was sealed off as toxic. Jacob and his team decided to investigate, their curiosity piqued by the inconsistencies and lack of information about the asylum. They split into 2 groups, with some heading to the library and Jacob and Jessica asking the locals. One woman, after first claiming to know nothing, warned them. "Nothing good comes from that asylum. It's best you leave it alone." She mentioned a local named Mary, whose family was involved with the asylum. Mary was an elderly woman living in a run-down house. After some hesitation, she invited them inside and revealed that her grandfather had been head of operations at the asylum and had died soon after. She had uncovered a file after her father's death, containing details of horrible tests and experiments on the mental patients. The patients had slowly lost themselves, and after they died, the living patients began to have conversations with the dead, until eventually everyone at the asylum lost themselves and could not function mentally. "I wasn't going to help you at first, but you seem like good people. I think you will do the right thing," she said. Confusing them for journalists, she urged them to release the truth, but not to visit the asylum. "That asylum is no place for people like you. The devil lives there now." "The devil and all his demons," Mary said as she grabbed Jessica's arm. Despite her warning, they went to the asylum. As they stood at the gates, they noted that the building seemed much older than Mary's house. Jacob saw a man staring at them from a window upstairs. When he pointed it out, his team members saw nothing, dismissing it as a joke. As Jacob entered the asylum, he felt the temperature drop drastically. It felt as though 1,000 eyes were watching. The floors and doors were stained with blood, the rooms filled with chairs and beds with straps. Jacob found himself alone, and the temperature dropped even more. He walked out to follow someone, but nobody was there. He turned to leave, and was met by a young woman with rotting flesh. One of her eyes was being eaten by maggots. She got closer and opened her mouth. Before she could do anything, Jacob heard a scream from upstairs. When he went to look for his teammates, he found Jessica sitting alone, mumbling. When Jacob approached her, she said, "But Jacob, we can't leave. We have to wait for the others so we can all go together. And then, don't you get it though? We can't leave. You have to stay with us now, all of us together." He realized that this was not Jessica. Her face was no longer as he knew it, and she began to laugh hysterically. The room filled with other partially decomposed patients, who all began to laugh with her, their stench filling the room. Jacob's body joined in, his own laughter mixing with theirs until he lost himself. When he opened his eyes, paramedics were attending to his group. The police were there, questioning Mary, who had called to say they were in danger after their visit. Jacob regained consciousness in a hospital, but the rest of his group were unresponsive. He had been found laughing hysterically by the front door, meaning he had not gone more than 11 steps inside the asylum. The rest of his group were found much later. It had been 9 years since the incident, and Jessica and the rest of the group remained in an asylum. Jacob gave up exploring the paranormal and visited them regularly to remind himself that his experience was real. He learned that behind every myth, there is some truth. It was something that was beyond human understanding, and that some things should not be disturbed. The massage parlor's horror. Barbara, a massage therapist, had a regular client named Tim, a married man who had never given her any trouble. One day, Tim came in looking tense. When he took off his shirt, Barbara saw marks and cuts all over his body. They didn't look like they were from a fight. They were like key points. As she applied cream on his back, it began to move on its own. Tim screamed and moved violently. His body began to change, his muscles swelling. He looked at Barbara with anger, scratching himself and making unpredictable movements. She grabbed a shovel to defend herself, but he pulled it out of her hand and threw it aside. He threw her against the wall, and then, no longer focused on her, he began destroying the garage. As he screamed, his body moved on its own, and he scratched himself until she thought he would pull his skin off. In the middle of his rage, Tim gave a huge, terrifying battle cry, his face close to Barbara's. She fell to the ground, crying. Tim was about to attack again, but the garage door opened. Her neighbors were pushing it open to help her. They dragged her out, and Tim ran out into the night. Tim never showed up again, and his family never responded to her messages. Since that day, neighbors had reported seeing some kind of animal running through the neighborhood at night. She would often think of him and wonder if the monster was Tim, the house of cannibals. Adam, a man who enjoyed driving down lonely roads at night, found himself in a living nightmare when he was taken in by a seemingly friendly couple. One night, he stopped at a remote house, seeking shelter. The couple were extremely welcoming, offering him food and a place to rest. They seemed obsessed with him eating. When he tried to sleep, he heard strange noises and voices. The couple was speaking. "Piglet, it's true, honey. You have to keep him well fed. Tomorrow I'll make him a big breakfast. That way when we open him up, he'll taste better." Adam was paralyzed with terror, understanding that he was in the home of cannibals. He sent his brother his location on his cell phone. Before he could do anything, one of them opened the door and dragged him into another room. He was told, "You know, I knew you were listening to everything I was saying. Why do you think I said it out loud? Do you think because we live on the road we don't have cameras?" The couple dragged him into a room where he saw dismembered bodies. He struggled, but they overpowered him. They sat him on a chair. The woman approached with a lighted needle puncher. Adam noticed a smell of wine coming from them. When the woman tried to use the needle, Adam grabbed her arm, and a fight ensued. He broke free and ran. The couple chased him through the darkness, their voices echoing behind him. He finally reached the road where the police were waiting for him. He told them what had happened. The police searched the house, but the cannibals were gone, likely hiding in the woods. The memory haunted him, and he would dream of that horrible room, seeing their eyes watching him and mocking him for eating human flesh. The road trip horror. A couple, who had chosen to work from their van while traveling, found themselves in a dense forest-covered freeway at night. They had a strict no driving in the dark policy, but they were forced to camp in the middle of nowhere due to the sun setting. They found a small building by the road and parked there. As they set up camp, they began to hear rustling noises from the woods. The noises grew closer. Then they heard the piercing scream of a woman. There were loud footsteps. They ran into their van and locked the doors. They saw someone peep into their van through the slits in the curtain, before someone started pounding on the front door. Alarms set beneath the van began to go off. The alarms stopped and everything became quiet. They drove away, breaking their own rules, and reached a town by midnight. In the local diner, they met an old waiter who, after hearing about their experience, told them the legend of a witch who turned a villager into a child-eating monster. Now, whenever people travel that road at night, they experience weird things and hear cries of women begging for the lives of their kids. They were told it was better to believe than to play with fire. They were given their food for free, then slept in their van. Back home, they reviewed the footage from that night and saw an ugly face peeking from behind a tree. That monster was still out there. The Wendy's incident. Timothy Malone and his girlfriend Monica, after a late night out, decided to stop by a Wendy's restaurant. They were the only customers. The employee was a middle-aged man with a beard. He was extremely skinny and his eyes were glassy. He made uncomfortable eye contact and didn't say a single word. Monica went to the restroom and did not return for 15 minutes. When she walked out, she was pale-faced and her eyes were dead. She walked past Timothy. Timothy noticed a flickering light coming from under the bathroom door. Inside the bathroom, there was an old box TV that had a weird video on loop. The video displayed random shapes, colors, and images. They called the police, who explained that the Wendy's was supposed to be closed, and that the man they described had no prior records. The officer said that hypnosis had likely been used on Monica. From that day on, neither of them went to another Wendy's. The Facebook haunting. A man who had lost his loved one, Angela, had finally decided to move on when he was suddenly contacted through Facebook. He deleted her from his friend list, and as soon as he did, a chat window opened with a message from her. He tried to close the window but couldn't, and the computer screen began to distort. Angela's face got closer to the screen as if it wanted to come out. He unplugged the computer, but when he returned to his room, the computer was on, with Facebook open. Angela's profile picture was without her, and the door was closed. A dark silhouette began to form, walking towards him. It was Angela, but her body was grey, almost blue, and she had a horrible mark on her neck. She put her hand on his neck and began to squeeze violently. Before he lost consciousness, he heard her whispering, "You are mine, you always will be." When he woke up, he had a mark on his neck and a kiss bruise on his forehead. He couldn't reach his girlfriend. He saw Angela's silhouette in the dark, stalking him. She didn't want him with anyone but her. The Taco Bell Midnight Terror. Alex, a night shift employee at a Taco Bell, was entrusted with closing the restaurant. There was only one rule. He had to leave before 11:15 p.m., but it was absolutely forbidden to stay after midnight. He did not know why. The manager was extremely strict about this rule, but would never explain it. The other employees didn't want to tell him. Alex had always followed the rule, until a fateful night when, in the process of cleaning, he accidentally broke the ice cream machine and flooded the entire restaurant. He decided to stay a little longer to clean the mess. He finished cleaning, but it was 12:15 am. He tripped on the wet floor. As he tried to get up, he saw a shadow with no features. It seemed withered and impossible. It began moving slowly toward him. His heart was pounding, and he backed away slowly. He felt a strange pressure on his knee, and it broke. He crawled to the exit. The entity got too close, and he began to choke. He felt like he was going to die, but suddenly, the door opened, and his manager pulled him out. He had broken the rule by not leaving before midnight. "What was that?" Alex asked his manager. "We don't know what it is," his manager said. "We only know that it arrives at midnight and attacks whoever is in the place." They knew it was dangerous to remain at the restaurant past midnight, but had to keep the place open to provide for the town. Alex kept working there, but he never broke the rules again, always leaving before 11:15 p.m. He learned that there were things beyond human understanding. He was also sure he would leave any place before midnight. The Daramasan game. A man, a self-proclaimed horror fan, decided to play a dangerous game called Daramasan, also known as the bath game. This was a dangerous game in which the rules had to be followed correctly, or it wouldn't work, or even worse, the Daramasan would attack you sooner than expected. He turned off the lights, and he followed all the steps to start the game. While he was playing, the atmosphere became dense, and he was shivering at the thought of remaining a moment longer in the bathtub. The game was over, but the real game started when he opened his eyes the next day. That night was traumatic, filled with nightmares of a woman with one eye who was looking for him. He woke up remembering that this game summons a spirit that will do everything possible to kill you during the next day. He began to feel that something was behind him, watching. He tried to continue his normal routine, but he felt the same dread that he had felt in the bathtub. When he woke up from a nap, Daramasan was gone, but the house felt different. Then he saw her, covered by a mist, and her face was white and intense. She had black hair, and she looked dead. As she advanced, the atmosphere became heavier. He could not say the word to win the game. He was choking. He felt a lump in his throat. She came closer and closer. He had challenged the paranormal, and now it had won. The deep web nightmare. A group of 18-year-old scouts went on a field trip and were attacked by men dressed in black, wearing masks. One of them was recording while others were carrying guns and a rusty axe. The men explained that the boys were part of a mob live show being broadcast on the deep web. They were randomly chosen as victims. They were to play a twisted game in which only one would survive. The men spun a bottle to decide who would be the first to die. They dragged the first boy into the dark forest. His screams haunted the rest of them. They were told only one would escape, the rest would suffer the same fate. As the night progressed, the men continued to pick them off. The last two were told they could fight to the death or face an even worse fate. One of them killed the other and was allowed to leave. The men threatened him if he didn't tell his story. He ran into the forest until he found a path and went to the police. The police found no trace of the psychopaths or his friends. The deep web is a dark and mysterious place, difficult to trace. The man felt like a coward, but also a survivor. He did not want to lose his family. He learned that even if you don't know the deep web exists, you can become a victim. The abandoned hospital. A man who enjoyed urban exploration decided to explore a forest and found a mysterious abandoned hospital. It looked like it was under construction. He entered to hide from a stalker. The hospital was fuller than he expected, and there were lights behind a closed door. He opened the door, finding a hallway with light. He walked in. He stopped in front of a door that was open, and there was something peeking out. He described it as a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head with huge white eyes and a smile from ear to ear. This being walked out of the door and toward the man. The being's steps were irregular and difficult, and the way it walked seemed forced. The man ran, falling down the escape hatches. He fainted. When he woke up, the light was gone, and the door was locked. He told the police what had happened, but they did not believe him, telling him that he was hallucinating. They did catch the stalker, a former convict who had escaped from prison. The man wondered what had happened that day, but he was afraid of camping or hospitals. He hoped no other explorer would end up in that hospital. The Wendy's mascot. Jacob Lane, a Wendy's employee, found himself on the night shift. After the usual jokes by his colleagues to try and frighten him about a rumor of Wendy herself visiting the place, and to make sure to treat her right, Jacob was alone in the restaurant. A group of rowdy high schoolers came in, and when they finally left, Jacob started cleaning. He felt a presence and found a young girl standing near the entrance, staring at him with big black eyes. She said, "You shouldn't be rude to me in my home. You all need to learn to respect." As he tried to leave, he was attacked by the girl, whom he realized was the mascot. He was dragged down, and the girl jumped on his chest, choking him. The driver screamed, and the girl jumped off and ran away into the dark. The police and his boss arrived. The police investigated and considered a theory that Jacob was high on drugs or got into a fight. They brought up a story about a former Wendy's employee named John Stugart who had had an encounter with the mascot and had been placed in a psychiatric hospital. Most records of the case had been discarded, leaving people wondering what really happened that night. Jacob was also left wondering what was the truth about that night. The truck driver's terror. Stepan, a truck driver, had a long delivery from South Carolina to North Dakota. It was December, and there was a snowstorm warning. He stopped in a small clearing by the freeway to avoid driving in bad weather. He lay down to rest in his makeshift bed and was awoken by a sudden bang. It was as if something had hit the rear of his truck hard. More bangs followed. He knew that someone or something was hitting against the steel. He began filming through the window, and he saw yellow eyes staring straight at him. It was not an animal nor a human. He knew he didn't stand a chance, so he hid and prayed. The creatures banged on the doors and the hood of the truck for an hour before leaving. In the morning, he saw dents in the steel and no footprints. At his destination, people asked about the dents. They told him that people believed a half-human, half-animal hybrid roamed that area after sunset and attacked anyone who came across it. He showed them the footage, and he wondered if he was lucky to survive. McDonald's shadow. A McDonald's employee was closing up shop alone when he started feeling like he was being watched. The men's room door opened and closed on its own. The bathroom was empty. He felt an intense cold and saw a blurry figure near the soda machine. It was composed of shadows. He told himself that what was happening wasn't real. The figure was no longer there and was right next to him. It had no face and communicated that he wasn't welcome. The entity began to move, slowly approaching. It was as if his body began to move only toward the fryer, which was turned on. He fell to the ground, burning his skin in the hot oil. He crawled out of the restaurant. The entity was still there watching him. As he started his car, he saw the entity at the door staring at him. The manager told him that the police did not find anyone there, and he would look at the security footage the next day. The next day, they found the footage was true. The figure was standing in front of him as he was struggling with the fryer. The manager confessed that other employees had seen the figure during the night. The entity seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and disappeared as if it had never been there. The employee left McDonald's and the restaurant closed for a few months. The manager never acknowledged him again.